Thank you so very much, Najuma, and to Megan, the USC CRCC team, and the compelling preaching cohort. It's good to see some of you again. I recognize some faces now that we're on the digital end, which is, somewhat appropriate, I guess, given our topic today as well. As Najuma mentioned, I kind of did a deep dive on the history of technology and religion and how religious communities and cultures have adapted to technology in the past. We're not going to do that today, but we're going to focus on some more practical elements of AI. But I am going to share some kind of front load stuff just to make sure we're all on the same page about what AI is and the uses of AI and what some of the chatter is out there about it. And so today, as we do that, the idea is to get to the point where we can look at a few resources that some of you might have already used or been aware of, but maybe help us think together. Not that I'm the expert or anything. I'm a fellow practitioner in this setting and on this call to start thinking about how we might be able to use AI, what the limits of AI are, and how we might be able to channel AI or steward AI, as I like to think about it, in our work with the communities that we're engaged with or that we're called to. To do so, I'm going to share some slides, and I do believe these slides are going to be shared with you afterwards. So if you have questions about particular slides or you didn't get the notes down, don't stress out. These will be shared with you. You can come back to the recording later. Does everyone see that screen? If you could just give me a thumbs up, make sure, and nodding of the head. Fantastic. So AI Preacher asks, how do I use artificial intelligence? That's what we're asking today. That's what we're engaging with today. And I first started thinking about this more seriously when I went to the town of Fürth in southern Germany. Now, I live in Germany full time. That's home for me. And about 2.5 hours south of where I live, I went to a church service where this was the pastor. This is an AI-generated pastor in a church in the town of Fürth, Germany, back in June of 2023. And he delivered an AI sermon, fully constructed using AI video technology, AI open access chat technology, and delivered a sermon. It was, in many respects, kind of what you'd expect from an AI sermon. Wasn't totally fluid, felt a little, if you could say, robotic. And yet at the same time, I thought, how might this individual compare to a first-year seminarian or someone who is trying to preach for the first time? And I said, not too different, pretty similar. And so I started thinking about how, there are AI preachers already out there to varying degrees, to varying abilities, but this is a technology we need to take more seriously. And I know a lot of you are thinking about this as well. Barna Group, which does some research around these issues and maybe isn't always the best to talk about cultural issues at times in terms of their demographic information. But when they talk to pastors in the churches that they're surveying, they asked for what pastors favor to use AI for, or what kind of responsibilities in their work that pastors might turn to AI for. And they have a bunch of different things that they might be able to turn to AI to or for. But one of the things I wanted to focus in on is this kind of top list where a majority of pastors that Barna surveyed felt that they could use AI for these 4 things in their communication, to track church attendance or church or member engagement, to assist with marketing and marketing materials, or to assist in graphic design, which is also a lot of times associated with marketing or some of the more creative work that you might be doing in your local congregations. Less than half of pastors, however, felt that they would like AI to be involved with things like sermon research and preparation, or creating study materials, or some of their professional communications, or in sermon writing. Just 12% wanted to have AI do any of the sermon writing for them, and just 6% wanted AI to help with counseling for congregants and church members. And that one I can really understand because that kind of robotic nature of the AI preacher in Fürth, Germany, isn't something I'd want to bring into a counseling situation. But today I am going to talk a little bit about how you might be able to use AI in sermon research and preparation, maybe to help with a little bit of sermon writing and creating study materials. I've used it in some of these ways for good, sometimes not for good, sometimes to mixed results. But again, this is just to be in a sandbox today with you as we continue. So as we go through today, I just want to hit on what artificial intelligence is, some helpful uses, some conversation around the advantages and disadvantages, the benefits and drawbacks, and then to play with or just show you how I play with some tools and best practices, and then we can have an open conversation about that as well. What is artificial intelligence? Well, there's lots of different ways that experts talk about AI, but one of the things that I often try to preface for myself and for others is that AI probably isn't what you think it is. And so I try to bracket my own mind when I'm coming to this topic because I'm not an AI expert. I'm not a programmer. I'm not a designer. I'm not somebody involved in the philosophy of technology. I'm a practitioner. I'm somebody who's interested and curious. I come at it with a religious studies background, with a theology background, with an ethnographic or anthropological background, but I'm not an expert in this. So I always try to remind myself that AI is probably not what I think it is. It's probably less than I fear, but it's probably more than I realize. Less than I fear, but more than I realize. Artificial intelligence is in general a suite or a kind of a selection of different technologies that enable computers, and through computers, those who use them, you and I, to perform a variety of different advanced functions in terms of language or data, and other types of information or video or audio as well. And the idea is to make it so that these machines are able to automatically produce or perform certain tasks without input from humans or without supervision from humans. There may be interaction or engagement with humans, but these machines are able to learn and adapt and to share and to create with little or less interaction from humans than kind of traditional computing machines or traditional technologies. There are lots of different kind of divides and definitions of what artificial intelligence is, but one of the more common expert categorizations of artificial intelligence kind of puts it in these 4 different categories or 4 different stages of artificial intelligence development. One is reactive machines, which we've had around for a long time, as well as limited memory machines, which we've had around for a long time. These are forms of AI that you're very used to having interact in your life, whether it's from some of the base functions of like Siri and Alexa that have reaction and limited memory, to other things like predictive text that you use on your phones, or grammar checks that performed on your Word documents. These are things that have been part of our lives for decades, if not for the last few years, as we picked up more and more smartphones, etc. But these are kind of more limited uses of AI. Where a lot of research and engagement is right now is actually on the next stage of AI, which is in terms of mind theory and then self-awareness. So we don't have a lot of mind theory AI out there. It's very experimental at this point in time. There's a lot of funding, R&D funding that's going into this to try and develop machines that will be able to understand that human beings have feelings and then to react to our feelings, to try and engage with the thoughts of others, to be able to see the other individual as a conscious and cognizant being, and to imagine themselves as one as well. Right now, artificial intelligence might be able to mimic mind theory. It knows enough that when given prompts, like if you go into Chat GPT and you say, "How are you doing today?" or you ask Siri how they're doing, they'll respond. The artificial intelligence will respond, but it doesn't yet have the capability to understand that you have your own thoughts, you have your own feelings, and to engage with you in a meaningful manner. But there's a lot of money being poured into artificial intelligence being able to do this. The ultimate goal for a lot of researchers is something called self-awareness. This is the idea to create machines that are then self-aware and are then able to adapt and engage with thoughts and feelings on their own. This is sometimes the stuff of technological dystopias and nightmarish science fiction films. We'll see if we get there, but we're very much a long way off. For those of you who were able to come to our in-person event out in Venice last month, Ulf Hemjakob, who works with large language models through SIS at USC, does a lot of information science research and is one of the early pioneers of the AI that is kind of reactive or is kind of limited memory AI, says we're a long way off still from mind theory and self-awareness AI, and that we need to recognize again that it's not as bad as we fear, it's not as talented as we think. And there's still a lot of work that has to go into making sure AI knows what it's talking about. And I think that's important to keep in mind as we start using AI as a tool, that AI isn't as good as we think, but it can do more than we expect at this point in time. So, how might we be able to use artificial intelligence? Well, before we talk about how we might be able to use artificial intelligence, I think it's helpful to dip into a little bit of the philosophy of technology and a philosopher named Albert Borgman, who created what has been called the device paradigm. And Borgman divides uh, things between focal things and devices. And focal things are physical objects that take practice, take intention to learn, can create community through their use, and have an intimate connection with you and I as human beings. A very common example of a focal thing would be something like a musical instrument, a violin or a guitar or a piano, or also a book, a physical, actual book, a work of fiction or nonfiction. It doesn't matter. But words on paper, paper in your hand, that musty little smell that you get when you go into a bookshop or open up an old book, the crease of the paper. And the idea is a focal thing is something that users remain aware of the ultimate concerns and significance of them in their use. And it takes a bit of engagement on your part. It can also create community when someone performs a piece on their musical instrument. There are individuals that gather around. There's a book club that gets around a book and discusses its ideas as it engages with the author and their intentions and their perspectives. These are a lot of the things that existed pre-technological age, very used to engaging with focal things. They're tools that we might be able to use. There might be limited engagement, but that takes more of our connection and intentional interaction to work with a focal thing. Devices, on the other hand, are things that are used as a means to an end. This does not take practice, does not immediately create community, and has no ultimate concern. It's just something we use. You can think of some, basic tools like an axe. An axe is kind of just a device. You don't need to learn how to use an axe. Now, there are better and worse ways to use an axe, better and worse ways to apply the use of an axe, but it's pretty simple for someone to pick up an axe and quickly understand what it is used for and how it can be used. It doesn't take a lot of practice. It doesn't necessarily create community. You're not thinking about its ultimate concern and significance. You're just using it to chop wood. Another example, a more technological example, would be something like a television. Again, it's not too hard to operate a TV. There are better ways to use a TV, easier ways to use a TV. For some of you who have had to maybe teach a family member how to use a remote control, maybe that's easier, maybe that's harder, but it doesn't take much to be able to use and control a TV. It's a device that we use for our entertainment. And Albert Borgman talks about the difference between focal things and devices, and really points out the fact that our lives are being more and more inundated with devices. And rather than making our lives easier, Borgman argues, that they can make our lives more complicated insofar as we're used to using devices and we no longer know how to use focal things, or we no longer know how to take the time to use focal things. And what some have done with his philosophy of the device paradigm is say, even when we come to devices, we want to take time to think about how we might be able to use this device more as a focal thing. To really learn and engage how we might be able to use this device intentionally. It will remain a device, but how can we be more intentional with the use of this device? And I think that's helpful to think about when we come to artificial intelligence, to treat artificial intelligence as what some have called a lieutenant, which is a military term to most of us. But when you get into the original etymology of the word, lieu and tenant, it's a deputy or assistant that acts on the behalf of a superior. And I'd like for you to think of yourself as the superior. AI is not the superior. You are. You're in charge. You're the general. You're the corporal. You're the colonel. And you have a lieutenant, a deputy or assistant who acts on your behalf. So AI is there to do things on your behalf to help make your life easier. And you're going to use it intentionally. You're not just going to tell AI to do all the work for you. You still need to be in charge of the core aspects of the task. But this lieutenant can help you do certain things to improve your work, to expand your work, to make your work perhaps better, or to reach new audiences. There are some people that then say, well, if AI is a lieutenant, then AI is useful for monotonous things, to help me write emails or to put out that marketing piece of information or to help with my communications or to check my grammar. Sure, things. I never want AI to touch the creative process of my work. Now, I'm going to push back on that a little bit today and say I think AI can be helpful as a lieutenant to your creative process. And I've found it helpful as a brainstorming tool, you might say. And I'm going to show you some examples of that later. But I do think there's something good here, again, to remind ourselves we want AI to do the tasks that maybe are hard for us or are harder lifts, and it can help us ease that lift a little bit. This is a comic or a cartoon that I thought kind of spoke to this. And again, kind of looking back on that AI pastor, but there's that robotic pastor, very obvious in this instance, not as obvious as the example from Foot I gave earlier. But the critique the critique in the pew is, I agree that it was a near perfect sermon, but don't you think it lacked soul? And so again, if we're to think of ourselves as superiors, we also want to think of ourselves as the individuals with soul. And so AI can be part of the process, but we have to bring our own soul, our own personality, our own perspectives and deep learning to it as well. One of the things I always like to remind when I'm talking to pastors or preachers about this is that AI will not, at least right now, and should not replace preachers, but it can absolutely help us in the work that we do. So some uses. As I already mentioned, I think brainstorming is a great way that AI can help. Are you thinking of a new sermon series? Are you trying to get rolling on a Monday morning? You've done your preaching on Sunday. Now you got to get up and get ready to do it again. And you're like, oh, I have no idea for what I'm going to talk about next Sunday. Or if you're planning 2, 3, 4 Sundays out, I don't know what I'm going to do in 3 weeks' time. I found AI to be very helpful to at least get my brain going on a new idea or perhaps a fresh perspective. And rather than bugging my wife about it or trying to find a colleague to talk to, I can quickly turn to AI. Now, I still may talk to a member of my community, or I still may talk to my wife or a colleague or somebody else to bounce the ideas off of. I also used to go to a local cafe and mention my sermon topic to the barista when I was there and get their feedback on it and what questions they might ask. But I like to start these days with AI as a way to just kind of get thinking about the topic and maybe find some resources I've not been able to engage with before. And that is the second helpful use of AI, I think, is enhancing research. Just like a lot of us probably already use Google to help expand our research or to do our research faster, AI can be perhaps even better, even faster, even more expansive in helping us enhance our research and find new resources to be able to augment what we're writing or what we're working on. There are limitations to this. I'm going to come back to that later, but it can help to enhance our research. Another thing is to use apps like Otter AI, which I'm going to show you if you're not familiar with that already, to create transcripts or to produce translations. When I do certain interviews, again, there are certain interviews I don't use AI for, but there are some interviews or some meetings, if I want to create a transcript for it, I use AI. Zoom already uses AI to create a transcript of a lot of the meetings that are recorded. And these are very helpful because as an ethnographer, as someone who does interviews all the time, as a reporter, someone who does a lot of interviews, transcripts take time. Now, I don't use AI with vulnerable populations or people whose information might be need to be protected, or if I'm working on based on a contract, some type of informed consent where a person has said that this interview is only going to exist between the interviewer and the interviewee and the use of their particular research. I don't let a large learning model like AI at Otter AI take that information. So I don't use this for all my interviews and conversations, but those that are public or those where there's no contract or those are not with vulnerable populations, I might use AI for transcripts and translations so it doesn't take hours for me to reproduce them and I can come back to them quite easily for my notes. We can also use AI for design and art. If you don't have a design department in your community or at your organization, it can be a lot to put together good art. And gosh, a lot of us have probably relied on clip art or, that ubiquitous image of somebody with their arm raised in silhouette on a mountain or looking out at a beach or on a sunset. I think we've all used that image in its various forms. Well, AI can help you create better images, more engaging images, better designs, so that they're more connected to human life. They're a little more engaging. They're unique rather than being the same one that every preacher has used for the last 10, 15 years. We can get beyond papyrus when we're trying to put scripture verses up on our PowerPoints. I think AI can help us do better design, even if we're not particularly designee or creative in this artistic sense. And then another use, one that I've used less, but I've heard a lot of preachers and organizational leaders and religious community builders using AI as a personal assistant to take over a lot of mundane tasks like scheduling or email writing and website and social media content. Even we're doing bulletin formatting and things like that. I know less about that aspect of things, but I know there's a lot of people that have used it in this capacity as well. Now, I want to talk about a few of the advantages and disadvantages of AI, and then we're going to get into a couple of examples of using it in those ways that I just mentioned. A lot of people talk about the advantages of using artificial intelligence, of automation of repetitive tasks. I think we've already kind of picked up on that already. Reducing human error. Again, think back to early grammar and spell checks. I learned a lot about grammar and spelling through my teachers across the ages, Mrs. Campbell, Mrs. Davis, some of my high school English teachers who taught me much. But I also learned a lot of spelling through Microsoft Word and that little paperclip that would pop up on the side in older versions of it. I also learned some of the things through there because they were able to come in and correct, tell me where to put a comma, or when I misspelled a word by a couple letters or whatever. And I'm sure you've had that experience as well. AI can help reduce those errors as well, and sometimes in more advanced ways than that kind of simple speller and grammar check that you had on Microsoft Word. It also can create more room for creativity. Again, I think brainstorming with AI has helped me be more creative in ways that perhaps I wasn't before, and more quickly creative, I think, in a lot of ways. I just spent 3 months working at a church in Venice, California, and I was asked for the first time in many years to produce a message every single Sunday. Now, I know a lot of you are doing this all the time, and you might be chuckling at me, oh, poor guy, you had to do it for 3 months. Well, having not done it for several years, it was a lot to get me back into the rhythm of producing a sermon every single Sunday. And I found AI to kind of kickstart my creative process as I was working with those messages. But there are some disadvantages as well. There can be a difficulty in terms of accessing data. AI is a data hungry technology. It needs data to function. And if it doesn't have the data, then it will create it. It will use whatever data it has to be able to produce an answer or information for you. And so you need to be very aware of that, particularly when you're using AI for research purposes. You need to verify everything. Kind of going back to that lieutenant metaphor that I used earlier, if you had someone working for you, doing the task for you, and you were the supervisor, you were the overseer, you were the superior, you should check their work before it goes public. Or you need to be able to make sure you can verify that information because your name's going to be on it. And so keeping in mind that AI is a data hungry technology, and if it doesn't have the data, it will still produce an answer, puts that caution in that you need to be able to verify and double check things. Also, as AI is a new technology, there's not many people out there who are real experts in it. And perhaps you have someone in your community or in your congregation that knows more about AI than you do. Lean on those individuals, learn from those individuals. I mentioned Uf Hermjakob, who is part of that Venice community. I learned so much from him over the last several months, and I'm still engaging with him and his understanding of the technology, his knowledge of the technology. But you are not an expert and never will be. Perhaps maybe you will go on to be an expert in your second life or go back for another education, but I'm assuming most of you are not. And so again, lean on those who do know, but do know it's a disadvantage because a lot of us are just practitioners trying to learn how to use this technology. Using AI can also be expensive. I'm going to show you some free AI technologies. I'm going to make sure you can maybe think about how to use those that are lower access or lower hurdles to access kind of technologies in the realm of AI. But if you want to use AI to really excellent creative ends, you're going to have to spend money to be able to get to it. There are AI art producers that are better than others. And so if you want to create top-notch stuff, you're going to have to spend some money on these things. And I know resources can be tight in your community. So a disadvantage of AI can be that to do it well and to get the best results, it can sometimes cost a little bit of money. So let's talk about some tools and best practices, and I'm going to open it up for some questions. First, I mentioned brainstorming with AI, and what I want to do is show you an example of how I recently brainstormed with AI, and I'm going to pull that up on the screen now. Can anybody see this as it's going to a website? That'll pop up for you. Thumbs up. That's great. Fantastic. So I asked ChatGPT something you probably played around with, or maybe you've taken a look at, kind of took the world by storm about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. But I said, I'm looking to write a sermon on immigration. What are some possible themes or topics I might explore based on the Bible? Pretty simple prompt, very early stages of the brainstorming and thinking about this. And then AI popped back and gave me a 7-point series. This is more than a sermon. Again, I just asked, I'm looking to write a sermon on immigration. And here, ChatGPT said, writing a sermon on immigration offers a rich opportunity to explore themes of hospitality, justice, compassion, and the call to love others as ourselves. So far, so great. Love it. Here are some possible themes and topics you might consider based on biblical teachings. And it pulls up things like welcoming the stranger, justice and fair treatment, compassion and mercy, God's provision and care. Again, these can each be a way for you to start thinking about your sermon, or if you're looking to do a sermon series, to maybe even use this as the basis for an entire series. Now, I think back to when I first learned about hermeneutics and homiletics and the art of interpretation and the work of writing a sermon or developing a Bible study or putting together some type of resource for my religious community or my congregation. And I used to use something called Nave's Topical Bible. Does anybody remember that or interact with that resource from the past? It had its limitations, but you'd open up to a topic like mercy or a topic like compassion, and it would give you a bunch of different biblical references for where to start. That was an essential tool for me as I started developing different Bible studies and series. It would be a place I'd usually start. This is how I think of AI in this sense. It's kind of a replacement for Nave's Topical Bible. Is I pop in something like immigration, and then it gives me a bunch of different passages that I can go and take a look at and dive deeper from. Now, I wouldn't just use AI to write the sermon, but it would be a helpful prompt to get me going and to get me along the process of starting to think about this theme. And it's a quick way to see a lot of different Bible verses that can be developed, as AI says, into a full sermon, drawing on biblical examples, current events from the news, and practical applications for the congregation. Now, being a kind and gentle human being, or at least I like to think so, I thanked ChatGPT. I do try to be polite to GPT when I work with it. And I said, well, that's great, but I'm also thinking about a series on climate change over the month of July. Could you provide 4 examples of themes and topics I might preach on when it comes to Christianity and climate change? Now, notice I asked a different question here. Climate change in July. I wondered if it might hit on some themes about summer. Or I asked about, could you provide 4 examples of themes and topics? So I was more specific this time. I don't need 7. I don't need you to give me all the different angles. I want 4. And then instead of saying based on the Bible, I said when it comes to Christianity and climate change. So do we get a different response? Now, the ChatGPT kind of boilerplate sermon series on climate change can connect deeply with Christian teachings on stewardship, care for creation, and justice. Very similar to the first opening paragraph you saw when I asked about immigration, but then it popped up with, again, a similar outline to what it was on immigration. But creation care is a biblical mandate, impact of sin on creation, justice for the vulnerable and poor, hope and restoration in God's plan. What I like about this is it builds kind of building blocks, core teachings, focus on others, kind of cosmic on the 4th rung of this ladder that AI put together. And then again, concluding very similar to the way that it did with immigration. Each of these things can be expanded to include practical steps, theological reflections, so on and so forth. I show you these 2 examples to just kind of point out how you can start to use AI in a way that helps you brainstorm. Another way is to enhance research with chatbot GPT. So beyond the brainstorming process, before just kind of getting the noodle cooking a little bit on a topic like I just showed you, you can also enhance research with ChatGPT. And to be able to show you that, I want to go back to the same screen that we were just on, which I respond to ChatGPT and say, this is excellent. Thank you. I want to dig a bit deeper on the theme of hope and restoration in God's plan, which they kind of included here on point 4 of the climate change series that I asked it to create. Would you suggest some helpful resources? And then I got very specific: books, podcasts, journal articles on that theme in Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 through 20. So a very specific prompt. And ChatGPT came back with a lot. Colossians 1, 15 through 20 is a rich passage that highlights Christ's supremacy and the cosmic scope of reconciliation and restoration. Now, I may not agree with that interpretation, but that's all right. If I'd asked a friend, or I'd asked a colleague, or I'd asked the barista at my local cafe, they would have given me their interpretation too. Again, I'm treating AI as someone just giving me their interpretation based on the data that they have available. So I take that in stride, and then I look at the books that they've recommended, that AI recommends, journal articles, podcasts, and audio resources. As I mentioned earlier, it is important as the superior, as the supervisor, as the overseer, that you check your lieutenant's work. I took the liberty to check some of the work here already. N.T. Wright podcast, Christ in the Cosmos, definitely exists. Definitely a helpful episode to think about hope and restoration in cosmic terms, and does focus on Colossians 1, 15 through 20, and is based on some of N.T. Wright's writing. However, this journal article, Cosmic Reconciliation, Colossians 1, 15 through 20, and Scientific Cosmology by J. Richard Middleton, I said, that sounds fascinating. I was actually forgetting about this presentation. I was like, I want to read this article. So I went to find that article. And guess what? It doesn't exist. It's not a real article. Now, J. Richard Middleton does do work on this topic. There is work out there about J. Richard Middleton on the topic of cosmic reconciliation, but that particular article doesn't exist. Still, AI is super helpful. I did not know who J. Richard Middleton was before I did this prompt. Then I started going down the Google and J. Richard Middleton rabbit hole to find out more on the topic of cosmic reconciliation and what this particular theologian had written about it. But that article did not exist. So again, we got to check, we got to verify, but it can still be helpful, and it can still give you input for your research and your writing. Beyond that, transcripts with Otter.ai. Show of hands, who's worked perhaps with AI out there before to do transcripts? I find Otter.ai to be super helpful in a lot of different ways. Again, just like with all these other AI technologies, they're using, they're borrowing, they're stealing and sharing your data to improve what they're doing, and then also sometimes selling that data. And so again, when I'm working with vulnerable communities, when I'm working with people who I do not want that interview to go anywhere outside of interviewee, and I'm going to be protecting that data, I would not use Otter AI, and it's important for you to think about that as well. But if you're having a church meeting, or you want to just have a brainstorm process with yourself, you're walking along the beach and you get hit with inspiration, Otter AI is great for that. And what you can do is you can start this for free, and there's a limited amount of transcripts you can use per month, and there's like a time limit of 30 minutes, I think, on it as well. But it creates these wonderful summaries of meetings, and allows you to kind of create AI takeaways, like summaries that it takes from the conversation, or to create an actual transcript of the conversation. Again, you might use this just for your own notes. You might use this for a meeting if you've got a team of preachers in your community who have a conversation about what the themes are going to be. If you have the opportunity to brainstorm with actual humans, you can create a transcript of this. And again, this just saves a lot of time and a lot of effort to go forward. So you may want to check Otter AI out for your own uses. You can also help in designing your next message. And what I mean by this is creating graphic design. We live in an image-rich society, and there are benefits and disadvantages to this as well. But I like to use images when I am leading a study or I'm giving a presentation like today. You can tell I like putting a little bit of an intention into the design that I use. I like pretty art, and I used to work in graphic design, but I don't work today as a graphic designer. I'm teaching, I'm writing stories, I'm giving presentations. And so I turn to AI to help create art. Sometimes it's not that great, but sometimes it is. And one of the things I really like is I can create quote unquote, my own unique images. I don't think they're fully unique images. They, again, draw on data that's available in the models and in the data collection that they have. But they do help me get around using copyrighted material. And a lot of the resources out there will tell you when you might be infringing on copyright and give you a heads up that you might be doing so as you create AI images. But I've used it to create images for my website where I don't have a subscription to a particular clip art or to a particular image library. And so I use AI to create a design. Or maybe I use Google Images to find an image and I can't find what I was really looking for. I might turn to AI to help me create it. Now, I did this recently when we had the presentation back in July. I created one type of surfing Jesus with a professional AI art generator that someone had a subscription to that I was using. But I used a free AI generator to create a surfing Jesus image here. Now, this surfing Jesus image, it's fun, it's cute, it's attention grabbing. That's the idea. I would use that, perhaps I used the surfing Jesus that I shared about in July during a Bible study on Jesus walking on water, when I was discussing theories about how Jesus didn't actually walk on water, but he may have been surfing on pieces of ice that formed spontaneously on the Sea of Galilee. This is a theory that came out in a paper to scientifically explain why the disciples may have thought Jesus was walking on water. And to be funny about it and to be winsome about it, as I was getting into this like deep theological discussion and talking about academic papers with my parishioners, I created an image of surfing Jesus. Also, I was in Venice, California, so it seemed appropriate to have an image of a surfing Jesus. And this is one that was created using something that a lot of you are probably aware of, something called Canva. And so Canva is something that I know a lot of people work with, and it has a free online AI image generator. And if you go up and you want to create a design and you want to be able to create something, you can see I created some Last Supper ones using DaVinci. I also created something with a barbecue with monkeys. Don't ask me why I did, but this was something I was working on at one point in time, and it created some images to some mixed results. But you can also see how I created these surfing Jesus images. And I got a few different examples that came up. That one's also kind of fun. I like this. This is like quasi-Buddhist almost as well. This is perhaps a mandala, of a particular hand position. But there's some different things that you can do with Canva. And this is totally free. There are some limits that are placed on it, but you can create some excellent designs and some excellent images just putting in a simple prompt where I've said Jesus surfing with sunglasses on, and this is the image I got back. And this is something easy to do, something to pop into your next message or your next Bible study. Now, there's an article in a magazine that I write for called Christianity Today that says that there's a real danger sometimes in producing images of Jesus that reproduce, obviously, the data that artificial intelligence has available to it. So the predominant number of images of Jesus online are going to be of a white European male. And most of the time, Jesus in these images is super sexy. Like if you look back on this Jesus, that's an attractive Jesus. His beard is perfect. His locks are gorgeous. He's got ripped arms. And I like this image too, because he's holding a surfboard, kind of, sort of, and he's actually surfing on the waves with his own feet. So it kind of reproduces the miracle in it. But this is a good looking Jesus. And in that Christianity Today article, they talk about how there are some dangers to this notion of a sculpted, perfect Jesus. And there's also some racial diacritics in there, some class diacritics in there. So again, I want to put in the caution that even if we use this for fun, create images like this AI Jesus, we want to be aware of some of the dangers and limitations on that as well. And I'll make sure in the notes afterwards to send you that Christianity Today article, because they do a really good job of unpacking some of the dangers in that. That's all that I have for you today. Before we go into our conversation, I do want to share just this slide if you want to get in touch with me afterwards. This is where, I'm sorry, I keep clicking on the wrong thing here. See, technology doesn't always work well for you. But if you want to, you can get in touch with me through my website. You can get in touch with me on Instagram at Ken Chitwood or on Twitter at KChitwood as well. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I want to open it up for conversation as we go through the next around 20 minutes of our time together.